Good morning, and thank you. Thank you for the kind opportunity to speak at this conference. My name is Maarja Keskpaik, and I come from Estonia. I work at the Ministry of Education and Research, focusing on teacher policy and educational leadership, but I also have 15 years of experience in teaching and school leading. Today, I would like to share Estonia's approach to one of the most persistent challenges in education: how to achieve both high performance and equity. Let me start with the foundation. Estonia follows a comprehensive school system built on the principles of inclusive education. And you all know that this means that every student, and by students I mean pupils, we just in Estonia we tend to use the term students more often, has to reside, despite of their background or educational special need or needs, receive the best education at a nearby school. Estonia is a small country of 1.3 million people, and our education system serves about 162,000 students in general education. Despite our size, we have constantly performed well in international assessments such as PISA. And PISA has highlighted that Estonian education has some kind of magic power, because we can see that in our schools, the differences between students and schools are small, and also our education system has the ability to reduce the impact of family background on educational outcomes. However, and this is very important, achieving equity is not a destination, it's an ongoing journey. While our system performs well overall, we face challenges rooted in wider society that are increasingly affecting our schools. And what we see is that the impact of socioeconomic background is increasing. Second, differences between schools are increasing. Third, students in Russian language schools have been falling significantly behind. And fourth, students' psychological well-being and social relationships are declining. These challenges remind us that equity must be continuously designed into the system. As I mentioned earlier, Estonia's education system continues to perform well in international comparisons, yet some groups of learners have fallen behind, while others remain at risk of doing so. Therefore, my presentation today focuses on three specific groups who face the highest risk of educational disadvantage. First, children living in relative poverty. We see in Estonia that about 14% of all children live in relative poverty. And let me give you more specific statistics about the pupils. 2022 PISA results, the background questionnaires showed that 8% of the students who answered the questions said that they feel hunger daily. So, unfortunately, what we conclude is that we see poverty has raised in our society and it has reached our schools. Second, students with special educational needs, approximately 8.5% of all students. And third, students in Russian language schools, almost 16,000 students, or roughly 10% of all students. And I will return to this topic more detailed shortly, but this situation reflects a legacy of a Soviet-era demographic patterns in Estonia, and that still shape educational equity today. And it's very important to note out that these three groups also quite often overlap. So, how do we address these challenges? I'm starting with a funding mechanism. So Estonia education system is co-financed by the state and local governments. Local governments, municipalities, they receive education support from the state budget annually, and it is based on per student formula. And this formula means the number of students or the expected number of students in schools in that municipality. And this funding covers teachers' salaries, support specialist salaries, and can also be used for school lunches, learning materials, and cultural programs like our Culture Backpack initiative. But here's a critical design feature that the per student formula is adjusted using coefficients to account for, first, socioeconomic factors, such as lower tax base or higher poverty rates in that municipality. Second, geographic factors, including remote location and small school size. And third, special educational needs, students with disabilities or requiring additional support. In essence, I can say that what we do is we fund for equity, not equality. And let me give you one concrete example that illustrates this principle. A student in Tallinn, our capital, receives 1,800 in state funding. And Tallinn is northern Estonia, where you can see that dark red is most widely represented. And a student in Ruhnu, it's a small remote island, you can see inside the circle, receives 19,000 euros annually. And why? And actually the answer is very easy, because maintaining a quality school on a remote island with few students costs significantly more. And this is what we see, what equity by design looks like, recognizing that equal opportunity sometimes requires unequal investment. So, funding formula is just the beginning. Estonia employs a multi-level support system combining universal measures with targeted interventions. So we have the state level and we have the local government level. First, what's the idea behind the universal support? Is that state creates a foundation for all students with a purpose to meet every student's basic needs. And for example, in Estonia school, every student, every pupil is guaranteed with a free school lunch. And it's a warm dish on a daily basis. Second, an inclusive education framework is embedded in legislation. Every student has a right to have an access to support specialists. And in Estonia, by the law, you need to have 4 specialists: social pedagogues, psychologists, special education teachers, and speech therapists. So 4, it's mandatory. Of course, we lack of specialists as we lack of teachers. I think this can also be a big problem in your country, but by the law, this is the requirement. And we also guarantee free learning materials, textbooks, and also school health services, such as school nurse. And career counseling, this is the new thing, because we know that, if you implement inclusive education, also providing the tools how to provide the best possible track for the pupil is also very important. And we also have an initiative which is called Culture Backpack Program. And this is an initiative with a cooperation with Ministry of Education and Ministry of Culture. And schools receive extra funding so they could offer access to culture for pupils. As we know that nowadays school isn't only about gaining new knowledge, it's also, at least in Estonia, a lot about improving general competencies, like social competencies, communication competencies, and the impact of this, target here is to also promote cultural competencies. And this is co-financed between 2 ministries. So, and needs-based support comes from the local government, and it adds targeted interventions. So we have after school care programs, free hobbies and sports, social assistance, and this is also quite new thing in Estonia, but I think 90% of the Estonian schools, they also serve morning porridge. So also that every pupil could start their day on an equal basis. So additional teaching hours, language support, mental health services and tutoring. So then the key principle for us here is that universal foundation plus flexible needs-based responses equals equity in practice. And we don't rely only on universal programs and we don't rely only on targeted interventions. We need both. And it's also important to note that equity isn't only about funding formula or support system, it's also about daily practices in schools. In Estonia, there are 480 comprehensive schools. Schools are mainly municipal, but we have 6% of state schools and 11% of private schools. And what is very important to know about Estonian school is that our state grants significant autonomy for schools. Also for teachers, as long as you follow the learning outcomes which come from the national curriculum, you are free to do whatever you want. This is the principle. And this autonomy allows schools to implement models where inclusive equity is embedded in everyday practices. For example, and now I drop my official side of me and I step in as a teacher, as a former school leader, that by the law we can implement different inclusive education methods which come from the law. For example, in every mainstream school, we can, of course, operate with regular classes. Is it right? Oh, it is, yes. But we can also open classes with enhanced support. And this is meant for the students who have learning difficulties. And in this class, there can be up to 12 students. And last, we can also open classes with special support. And this class is meant for the students who have like mental difficulties. But by the mental difficulties, I mean like autism, ADHD, and etc. And how schools navigate those classes is their own choice. But it's also important to know about Estonia that teaching assistant system hasn't well developed. So if schools implement inclusive education in the way that they put this student who needs help in a regular class, quite often this student just can get lost because the teacher is alone with the students in one classroom. So, and when I worked in the school level, we saw that this system was very effective because we could guarantee the best possible learning zone for every student. But it is also very important to keep in mind that you can't segregate the students. So, and now I come back to the story which I said, that nowadays school is so much more than just knowledge, that we have lessons, but we have so much more, project learning, study trips, etc. And this, for example, in my school, everything else we did together, so our students could see that it's normal to be different. We guaranteed the best learning zone, because this was also like the most efficient for the teacher, and everything else we did together, so we don't segregate the students. And this is how you can implement inclusive education in Estonia in a mainstream school. We still have special schools for the lower intellect students, but we are moving towards the direction that cancel those schools in Estonia. So, and this flexibility is very important. It allows schools to respond to the specific needs of the students while maintaining a commitment to inclusion. The key is balancing autonomy with accountability. Schools have freedom to adapt, but within a national framework that ensures every child receives appropriate support. Is the logic behind that. And yet, design alone is not enough if social realities reinforce separation. as we see in our Russian language schools. Now, for 10 seconds, I go back in history, because this problem or this division is rooted in history. During the Soviet era, 45 to 91, large numbers of Russian workers migrated to Estonia, particularly in industrial regions, in the northeast, and some urban districts in Tallinn. And Russian language schools often concentrate students from socioeconomically disadvantaged families. And this segregation is de facto driven by residential patterns and school choice, not by legislation. But the impact is real. So I'm not into rankings. I don't like PISA rankings. I don't think that comparing students is fair. But what I value is the background questionnaires which come from PISA. And this also showed us and made it really obvious that Russian language education lags behind Estonian language outcomes by approximately 1 academic year. Like 1 academic year is a huge gap. And there's a growing recognition in research and in policy making in Estonia that the principle of choosing the nearest school needs to be reconsidered in the segregated context. Additional criteria beyond distance should be added, not to recreate the segregation. And students in Russian schools, what we see, they have less access to quality education, and they have fewer opportunities to integrate into Estonian society. In 2024, Estonia took a big step forward, and we launched a phased transition to a unified Estonian language educational system. We started with the kindergarten, with first grade, fourth grade. So this year is kindergarten, first grade, second grade, fourth grade, and fifth grade. And it's an ongoing process until 2030. And the goals are actually clear, easy. We want to guarantee equal access to quality education for all students. We want stronger language acquisition and integration, and greater social cohesion and reduced segregation. And Russian language schools in Estonia are now considered as transition schools, and they receive additional support. So for the first year, the main target was language. The main target was language, so students, they received additional learning materials plus language lessons. So did teachers. And what we have seen, what has been really effective measure is that in the regions when the Russian speakers concentration is highest, teachers receive a minimum salary that is 1.0 times higher than in other regions. So this is also just to guarantee that these very specific disadvantaged regions have also good teachers. This is a very effective measure. And this transition is vital, and it represents our commitment to equity. But I want to be clear, the transition must succeed not just on paper, but in practice. What we saw from last year was that teachers in Russian schools, many of them, too many of them, they didn't obtain the necessary language level. And starting from this September, they can't work in schools anymore. In Estonia, the criteria language-wise, Estonian language-wise, is C1. If you are not a foreign language teacher, you need to speak Estonian in the C1 level to teach in schools. So this is, fortunately, we also have to look at the mirror and see what we can improve. But we must also ensure that students are genuinely supported and that teachers are prepared and that integration happens in ways that respect linguistic and cultural identity while building a cohesive society. So this is an ongoing process, and we try to involve as much as service, as much as data we can to succeed the process from the beginning. So, conclusion. And I start by returning where I started. Equity by design. What does this mean in practice? And the key 3 lessons from Estonia are that equal opportunity sometimes requires unequal investments. Equity means treating students differently to achieve fairness. Second, flexibility within a framework, that equity requires both flexibility and structure, autonomy for schools, but within guarantees for everyday students. So Estonia is like really not decentralized, and as we implement, we give autonomy to schools, to teachers, but we also attempt to give them as good guidelines as we possibly can. And third, confronting uncomfortable realities, redesigning structures that reinforce disadvantage. And this is the thing what I said about our Russian language schools. And the key lessons from there is also that with this reform, we were 30 years late. Because Estonia got their independence back in 1991, but until now, there weren't political will to make this transition. And last but not least, equity is not a destination, it's an ongoing commitment. And if you have further questions in the future, then please don't hesitate to contact me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for bringing in your expertise, and we'll definitely address some of the points in the afternoon panel discussion. But now there's time for your questions that you sent us. So let me bring them in. Okay, so we have a question for you. What are you doing to avoid the fate of Finland, whose performance in PISA has been declining, for example, as a result of migration, race poverty, etc.? So, if you could answer.
Yes, this is a good point because as I work at the Ministry of Education, I have many foreign groups coming in on a daily basis, also Finns. And it's funny because it also be the opposite way. We always learned from the Finns, not as it is now. They ask us also what we are doing differently. But I think there's one really big difference between Estonia and Finland, that Estonia is a really, compared to Finland, compared to Sweden, England, etc., a very homogene country. That we don't have this like a cultural mixture as you do. Now it is changing because of the Ukrainian war. We have more refugees, etc. But Estonia is a very attractive IT sector workers country. So also when we have like migrant children, they quite often come from really good families who are really motivated. But what Finland did, and this is a funny thing as well, that Estonia now performs better, but our teachers don't feel very good in their positions. But in Finland it's different. They don't do so well in results anymore, but the well-being of the teacher is very high. But it's a nice contrast. But I think what happened with Finland was that Finland went too far with all this project learning. And this was something which messed up their education system a bit. And then now I think at some point they also admit it. And at Estonia, maybe via curriculum or curriculum learnings, we are maybe more conservative.
Okay.
If I made many circles and now excuse me, but maybe I answered the question as well, hopefully.
Definitely. It's really, really good answer. Thank you. There's another question. Is there any correlation in between 3 groups of vulnerable students? And what percentage of students living in poverty is with special needs or from Russian schools?
As I said as well, we see from the data that those 3 groups are quite often overlapped. Yes, there is, because I think all of you who work in the school field know that if you are working with a troubled pupil, and at some point if you see the parents, everything makes sense. You know, quite often problem starts from homes.
And you mentioned the 3 types of classes, and there's a question from the audience. Can students from different types of classes cooperate and network? And if so, on what occasions?
One thing I'm just going to add, that if you have in the mainstream school, you have these 3 different class types. It is actually very organic, so you can move the students before the class types as well. And you know, nowadays students, especially after COVID, they can have very, very hard mental difficulties. So what we also did that, you know, with the smaller classes, they have less lessons. So for the mental problems, you can you know, switch the kids and move them around. But as I said as well, everything else, breaks, study trips, project learnings, concerts, whatever you can possibly do inside the school day, you do everything together. So you can't possible to segregate, or this you can't, then you potentially have to avoid to segregate the students. This is very important.
And maybe how do they react to each other? Because they probably know that they're in different class. So
yes, they know, but actually this was funny thing to say, but the tension went off when we offered kids the best possible learning zone. Because, you know, lots of pulling comes from that, oh, you're stupid, or you're stupid, you don't know how to write. If you eliminate that and you do the cool stuff together. So actually with the breaks and stuff, you could see easily that, you know, this small gangster guy and this small autistic guy, they could just stand to each other and, oh, you know, they didn't like even like notice it. It was totally fine. So magically it works, yes. So, and also like sometimes like we also need to think that we don't always have to do so much, you know, we can also do less. So.
Thank you. We have 3 minutes left, so maybe one last question. How important is the role of individual teachers in reducing inequality? Is there anything you believe teachers might do in general to better support students?
The toolkit of the teachers is very important. That this is also what our state try to provide. That every time we do some kind of curriculum implementation or something, we always give good guidelines for the teachers as well. And we provide inclusive education curriculum as a master's degree now in our universities. We have 2 main teaching universities in Estonia, and they offer the same master's program for the inclusive education. And this is mainly meant for the teachers who already teach. And a few years ago, we reunited our curriculum. And we are also, like in Estonia, there are 2 national curriculums. One is regular, another one is simplified. We are also uniting 2 of the curriculums. And always teachers are included as an external expert. So we always look, anyways, you like to do the cooperation with the NGOs, etc. But with this kind of type of developments, we always include teachers as well. Because they know the student's profile and they know the best what kind of training, additional training the teachers need. And in Estonia as well, we implement individual curriculums as well quite often on a school level. If you have some kind of like a mental disability, learning difficulties, it is possible that every student can have their own individual curriculum as well.
This will be about organized mobilization for struggling schools and key learnings from a major statewide initiative called Collaboration for Better Schools, or CBS, as I will say. That's the Swedish flag, by the way, up in the corner. My name is Martin Rogberg, and I am holding a PhD from Stockholm University, and I'm the director of the National R&D Center for Collaboration for Better Schools. As such, I work with some 150 researchers at 7 universities in order to support this Collaboration for Better Schools. This project reaches 200 local authorities and some 500 schools, so it's a rather large project, at least from a Swedish perspective. I work at the Department of Education, but I have a background in organizational and leadership research, and I work most of my life with bringing academia to practice. So I'm trying to be a gatekeeper, not a gatekeeper, but a bringer in between those two. What is the key thing about this is that there are too many school units, too many schools. They have facing large problems. They are struggling. They have a number of problems. The student outcome is low, and so on. So this, what I would talk about now, is a negative sample. I would talk about the worst functioning schools in Sweden. And how do we meet them? How do we support them? What can be done on a national level? This is what this presentation will be all about. If I should make a national comparison, I would talk about this project, basically. I'm not talking so much about Sweden by and large. I would talk about this project. And I would talk about how to meet and support those struggling schools. Just to give a brief view relating to the Estonian presentation we just heard, you could say in the 70s we have we're very good at compensating. That is to say, all through Sweden you could get a high quality education, more or less. However, we have problems with this, so there is a larger proportions of non-functioning schools having difficult situation. It relates to many things, one of them being we're not so homogeneous anymore. There is a lot of immigration. Well, the next slide. I should be the one doing that, yes. What are those? What are those schools? Well, this project is about shortcomings in student achievements, quality and equity. It's a negative sample. It's the school inspectors have targeted the schools needing the most support. So what do we know about them? One thing is very striking, is a very high staff turnover. It relates to all kind of staff, but the most problematic thing is that it's a large principal turnover. And in Sweden, the principal have a very strong position, and are expected to really change things when you're coming as a new person. So what you will do is that you will have a large portion of principal turnover, and the more principals that come and go, the stronger the informal leader gets, so to speak, in a negative way. So that's one of the problems. We have low teacher qualification in these schools, much lower than the average. The average is 80% with a perfect qualification. We have the lowest rate I've heard is 11%. So that's tough. That's not the general case, but that's the lowest figure I've seen. Language difficulties relating to migration, of course. And this is more common in the larger cities. There is also a lack of knowledge ethos. That's a common theme, and that's more in a rural area. In those rural areas, some of them at least, the one that we are meeting, everybody could be happy. The students could be happy, the parents could be happy, the local politicians could be happy. But since there is a lack of knowledge ethos, they learn too little. We expect too little. So that's one of the other problems. And there are many previous initiatives, large, small, from many circles. And the thing that it is, they don't work. And the general rule here is that we try to have a general initiatives working for all these schools. It doesn't work. We have to be very, very locally adapted. So how should we understand struggling schools? Facing downward spirals is one way of seeing it. We're meeting with schools that they have societal challenges that correlates negatively with operational challenges that correlates negatively with learning challenges. For example, societal changes mostly is about socioeconomical challenges. We have discussed that a little bit. There is a difference between rural areas and urban areas in this aspect. And they correlate with operational challenges, for example, high staff turnover and the other stuff we just discussed. And they correlate negatively with low student achievement. And so the vicious circle goes on and on. So the idea here, we have to do something else to break this vicious cycles, these downward spirals. So what do? Well, one of the things we shouldn't do is bringing in university professors just presenting PowerPoints. We need to go from university teaching to local development support. We have to balance between the PowerPoint trap, that's my kind of trap, and the dialogue trap. Because since they are so weak and so non-functioning and so non-collaborating among the personnel, among the teachers, we tend to focus on creating a good dialogue. But at times, there's just dialogue and no direction. So we have to have a mixture between dialogue and PowerPoint. And the problems for these schools are not only wicked, to use a popular research term as this time, wicked as opposed to tame problems, but it's also that they differ from places. They're difficult, and they're difficult in different ways. So what do? Well, there is this, what we call organized mobilization, temporarily over 3 years. I should say this, organized mobilization, just to make this point once again. This is not a specific technique. This is not about a particular teaching method. It's not about a particular position. It's not a general way of going about. It's about organized mobilization locally in time and space. And this project gives support over 3 years. To the left, you will see the initial analysis phase. We make a really in-depth problem analysis, and then we make action plans. And this could take about a year, because you really want the local schools to provide how does it look like, and why does it look this way, and you have to agree upon it so that you can act together. And this takes, well, 9 months or up to a year. And after that, there's tailored initiatives during a period of 3 years in total, 6 semesters, and then they're supposed to be able to carry on themselves. One way of seeing the goal of this project is to say that it's about improvement capacity. And you could see that after 3 years they have improvement capacity. That is to say they can improve by themselves after giving the support. So how do we go about it? Well, we create several groups, analysis group, and they analyze things like student achievement, teaching approaches, organizational leadership. They really try to give in-depth discussions about that. So we have discussions in schools, as group development analysis groups in schools, in preschools, at the local authority level. And they did independently analysis and also share those experiences. And then we have the initiatives, and since we have this in-depth analysis phase, they vary in between. They locally vary. However, we can see some general patterns looking in the rear mirror, such as language development approaches in the classroom, such as training development leaders. We're training leading teachers, so to speak, so that they could continue supporting their colleagues. And we're supporting quality development at the local municipal or the district level at the local municipality. So there are some of recurring themes in the tailored initiatives. And there is an organized mobilization and a longer, in 3 years, much longer than it's regular in Sweden. We used to have projects for a year, but this is a 3-year project. And we have an organized mobilization spatially in the organization. Key to here is not the specific approach technique, but it's having a system-wide organizational approach. This is about helping out. This is about different levels, different actors working together to provide the support, the structure, the stability, the climate needed so that you could, in the end, give students and children what they actually deserve and what they should have during the Swedish legislation. So what we do is we organize several school units, in this case targeted schools and preschools. Across hierarchical levels, we work in this development group on a teacher level, on a school management level, on the district level. Support from state and academia. This is the National Agency of Education in Sweden that runs this and finances this, and there's this 7 universities with 150 researchers that help out. And this is founded in quality requirements in the governing documents of Sweden. So this is the system-wide approach. So this is to say the initiatives I discussed, there's initiatives on the teaching level, initiatives on the management level, initiatives on the district level. So we're facing initiative on all levels, and we have development groups on all levels that work independently, but also that work together and meet and learn together. Obviously, you would like to put in all money so close to the student as possible, to the teacher as possible. However, the experience is that there have been a number of initiatives specifically targeting teachers that doesn't work. So we have to have initiative on school management level, providing the support for learning and stability at the schools and preschools. And we have to have initiatives on the district level, providing the support, the structures, the stability of the climate for the schools, school managers, so that they can support the teacher, that is to say. And after these 3 years, that's most obvious, most commonly the case. And what happens when you have these structures on better structure on the district level, better structure on the school management level, is that you provide the preconditions for teaching development. So after these 3 years, the typical thing is you focus on the teaching level and help out there and support there. So this is more about support than implementation. And it's about helping out, working together in order to support these struggling schools. Well, how do we go about? It's a good thing saying we organize mobilization, we work together, we gather forces, but that's easier said than done. So I will give you some of the examples, some of the challenges that we need to overcome. The first challenge is instability. We need to secure arenas for shared learning. The picture is it's a game, children's game really, called musical chairs. You have 5 children and 4 chairs, and then there's music, and then the music stops. And one of those children won't have a chair. So this is trying to visualize the high turnover, especially from principals. One of the schools we attend, there's a problem with principal turnover in Sweden by and large, but these schools, this is much more clear. One of the schools that I attended had 15 principals in 9 years. And just as we were saying in the previous presentation, in order to make things work, we must talk about not how we like things to be, how things ought to be, how things might be in the future, but how they actually are. And high turnover is an actual fact of these struggling schools. So what do? Well, we need to secure arenas for shared learning, because there's one thing that is not present at those schools, these negative sample, is these arenas, meeting places, professional development networks for shared learning. So we have to build or maybe strengthening what's already there for learning if we want it to work. We have to support relevant leadership over the arenas. We might have the arenas, but they should work. So we support these leading teacher, for example, so that they can provide relevant leadership over the arenas. And we rely on a collective learning approach. We rely on approach learning not as single teachers or single headmasters or principals, but as a collectivity. We try to do that. So it's collective rather than collegiate kind of learning. Another challenge is what we call organizational gaps. And we need to bridge those, because if you don't bridge them, this organized mobilization thing doesn't really work. We have a gap between teachers and principals and district levels in general. We have a saying, we have a famous study in Sweden, it's called invisible contract. There's an invisible contract between teachers and principals. And what that is, that's an implied power division. If the principals do not bother the teacher too much, the teacher won't bother the principal too much. And this might have advantages on an individual level, but if you want to improve things, it doesn't work. So we have to bridge those gaps, go beyond this power division. Otherwise, hard to make things work. And there is a similar implied power division between principals and district level. If we are kings or queens at the schools or in the classroom, we won't bother the above level with too much trouble. So what do, we have to target these development groups rather than individuals. We can't support single principals, for example, which has been very common in Sweden. We have to support groups. We have to include participants across levels in these development groups. And we allow all participants to meet from time to time in these development groups. At times, all personnel will meet. So we have to do things to try to bridge these organizational gaps. Fragmentation is another challenge. There's so many, since there's not equity all the ways, it's not equitable. Equity is a better word, which is not existing everywhere. So there's so many resources, so many actors, so many players on the local level, on the political level, on the university level, on the state level, trying to say, if you only do this, you will be fine. So there is no lack of money, not really. That's not the major bottleneck for these schools. And there's no lack of initiatives. But what is there's a fragmentation. So we need to concentrate development focus. We have to build on ongoing activities purposefully. We have to prioritize development areas. We make analysis and find several things need to be improved. We have to prioritize. We have to learn across different units. So we learn together, and we have to try to stay away from new initiatives. In Sweden, we use the word putting up the umbrella for unnecessary raining. Yet another, this is the fourth challenge we need to overcome. Lack of acceptance. We need to anchor the initiatives. Yes. Thank you for reminding me. We need to anchor the initiatives. We go out for schools. They have been appointed to an overall project in Sweden saying, you're the worst functioning schools in Sweden. So we need, obviously, everybody doesn't cheer when we arrive. So what we really have to do, we have to create conditions in order to ensure that the development will be seen as broadly relevant and legitimate. And it's actually the case here. People realize when the school inspector has been there and so on, it's hard not to say it's broadly relevant and legitimate. We have to make it feel like it's meaningful and valuable for individuals. And that is where we have the dialogue. We really have to meet people where they are. We try to pin down our PowerPoints and meet people where they are, so people will see they are actually trying to support me. They're not the enemy. They're my friend, my ally. And we have to generally give it a sense of feeling this is actually seriously meant this time, because there is an experience of several development projects coming and going. There's a famous study of nurses in England talking about BOHICA. BOHICA is an acronym for bend over, here it comes again. And what it relates to, it's, well, they talk about this, but if I don't do anything, there will be something new in a while. So the local authority, the school management, supported by the state and the universities, would have to see it's worthwhile getting into this project. It's generally seriously meant this time. It's about our local development. It's about organized mobility over both time and space. It will work. We need to believe that. Well, to sum up, this project, Collaboration for Better Schools, it's been around for, it will phase out in 2026. It's managed by the National Agency of Education. There are 198 local authorities, 498 schools, and 161 preschools. There is a spin-off network for principals in challenged areas. Local authorities has been inspired, so several local authorities have developed their own version. So there is a Stockholm version of Collaboration for Better Schools, for example. Other local authorities has been inspired, but perhaps not of the full approach, organized mobility, but parts of it. For example, the analysis, the in-depth analysis being done before starting out. And in 2024, a new initiative called Directive Initiatives was implemented. I would say that it's basically the same, but we have a new government, so sorry. I didn't say that, but it's basically the same. My time is running up. I was going to talk about how we run this. How do we work in such a large quantity of schools with so many teachers and so many researchers and so on? I would take that in the afternoon in the panel discussion. So thanks a lot for coming here. This has been about organized mobilization for struggling schools and some key learnings from collaboration. And he looked so meanly at me, so I have to stop now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. It's not true. I didn't look in a mean way. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. Okay, now there's time for your questions, and we're going to start with a first one. So we have a question: is it obligatory for the schools to enter the program, or do they enter voluntarily? And how do they... I'm sorry. The question just, disappeared, and I wasn't able to finish it, so...
Should I start with the first one?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Well, the first one is the school inspector, they go out doing inspections all the time, and from those inspection reports, you will find a group of local authorities, whether schools and preschools. And then the state asks these people who have been targeted for you're not working at all. At times they will even have fees because they're functioning so bad. And they will say, hey, you're criticized, here comes the sum of resources, will you accept to be a part of it? And of course, the majority says yes. So formally, voluntarily, in practice, perhaps not. I'm a researcher, not representing of the state, so I can say more. I can be more open, perhaps. Yeah.
And can you tell us, how do you find the schools? How do they target the ones that you want to participate?
We find the schools that, well, there's these school inspectors that goes out regularly, continuously, and make reports. So they're targeted from their reports.
Okay, thank you. We have another question that will hopefully not disappear before I can read it. How do you prevent schools from backsliding after the 3-year support period? Is there any follow-up support or monitoring?
This is actually a difference between this directive initiative, which is the continuation of Collaboration for Better Schools. It wasn't so much preparation for the follow-up, for the backup. So, and we find that some of these local authorities, they attended again on the same reports. So we are trying to do it, follow up much more closely. Okay. And one of the things we follow up is this improvement capacity. If they have improvement capacity, they can improve themselves. And we follow up, and that is the case after 3 years, that has been improved, and we follow up on that, you could say. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And probably the last one, how do you combat the lack of the knowledge ethos you were speaking about? And how do you motivate teachers and principals of schools? What role the parents play?
This lack of knowledge ethos, it doesn't really relate to the professionals in the schools. It's rather the people in the surrounding areas. So what they do in this project and other projects is they try to make collaborations. They organize not only within the school system, but outside of it. So in the rural areas, for example, you might have the ice hockey club being very prestigious. So you have ice hockey and homework done together, for example. So this is a short way of answering it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, please give a round of applause for Mr. Rogberg.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, on behalf of Maeve and myself, just to say we're delighted to join you here today. We both work with the Ministry for Education and Youth in Ireland, one in Dublin and one in Athlone. So one urban and one rural representative. But delighted to be here this morning to share with you some of our experiences of what we call the DEYS programme, which has been operating in Ireland for almost 20 years at this stage. And as you, I suppose, are looking now at your own journey and some of the challenges, but also the opportunities for you that exist in looking at how, I suppose, to really support children at risk of educational disadvantage. I will focus, and Maeve this morning, really on the DEYS programme itself, and not so much the wider programme of supports that the department provides to schools. So today's presentation, just a very brief overview of the education system, a look at some of those universal supports, so supports for all our schools, and then a concentration on DEYS and what being in DEYS for a school means, and looking at, is it working? And what we're finding out about whether it's working or not. And then just some of the challenges, some of the new developments that we're looking at, and they're very immediate. And then what's next for us as we look at how we continue to support children at risk of educational disadvantage in our system. So an awful lot in common with Martin and Maria in terms of the presentations and many of the challenges you outlined for yourselves this morning as well. So hopefully you'll find some of this of interest, and maybe it might spark some thoughts or questions, and happy to work through what we can with you. Just to give you a very brief overview in terms of the Irish education system. So around 4,000 schools, 3,200 of those would be what we call primary school. So that's from age 4 to around 12. And then the balance around the 722 post-primary from ages 12 to 18 or even 19 at this stage. System of free education and 3,000, you'll notice from the drop between the number of primary schools and then the post-primary schools, we have a huge number. A very large percentage of our schools are small schools with 4 teachers or less. So small rural schools in the primary sector, very dominant. 1,200 of the schools are in the DEYS programme. They serve about 260,000 pupils of our overall million pupil population. Pupil, student, learner, whichever we use this morning. So about a quarter of all our schools are in our DEYS programme at this stage. Very much a commitment right from the centre in terms of the Department of Education and Youth's strategy. So our statement of vision is around supporting and nurturing all children to reach their potential and removing the barriers that may exist. And within the goals of our strategy, there's a full goal. And I suppose that it really is a representation of the commitment within our government and by our minister in terms of tackling education disadvantage. So goal 2 there, to break down the barriers for groups at risk of exclusion. Really important to us, right up there with quality, participating to succeed, supporting our leaders and supporting our students and all of our workers. This is an old image that many of you are probably very much aware of, but I really like it because I know when I started work in this area first, I was struggling with that concept of what's the difference between equality and equity. And that idea that it's, as someone else mentioned earlier too, it's that investing that extra support in those children, meeting them where they're at, providing them with that support that they need at that time. And that really it is about equity of inclusion. So I said I'd mention some of the universal supports, and I suppose these supports have really grown in the last number of years. And in some ways, as Maria would have mentioned with Estonia, we have a lot of these are part of our, our main supports that go to all schools. I wouldn't have put it here, but we would also have a capitation per pupil amount that goes to every school, which I think is very common. But we'd weight that as well. So even with the capitation, if there are more travellers or Roma in a school, there would be extra capitation funding for that school too. So that's beyond whether they're in the DEYS programme or not. The first box, which is the Act, the Admissions Act, that came in 2018, that's about parental choice. And again, countries differ in terms of this idea, but in Ireland, it is a parent's choice as to which school their child goes to. Now, sometimes that's influenced by something like the transport system, so it will often be the nearest school because they'll have funded transport in order to get to the nearest school, but they'll have to make their own way if they go beyond the nearest school. But it's still up to the parent to decide where their child will attend. And just, again, it was mentioned earlier, the influence of our housing policy on that and then on our schools is really interesting and something that we need to really keep a very close eye on in terms of segregation. So, wellbeing and mental health supports. We have a really live debate in Ireland around the gaps in our mental health support systems and then schools being really pulled into that area. That idea that, the difficulties and challenges in society are very live in all of our schools. And for many children, and particularly the ones we'll talk about in a few minutes, it's in terms of trauma and intergenerational trauma. And we very much are becoming part of the response through our schools to some of the gaps in our health service. So it's, you know, it's challenging, but we do have a mental health and well-being policy and framework in all schools. There's an anti-bullying policy. Cináltas is the Irish word for bullying. So it's an anti-bullying policy. And then we also last year, for the first time ever, published an education strategy focused for traveller and Roma communities, children and young people. There's free school books scheme, which is now in all our schools. So just very recently, it has extended right to the top end of post-primary as well. It started in the DEYS schools, and then it moved into the primary and now into full post-primary. There's a real focus, and so someone's mentioning the PISA results and things like that. I think a glitch or a drop in our PISA results a number of years ago meant that there was a major focus put on literacy and numeracy in our schools and digital literacy comprehension. So really strong emphasis on literacy and numeracy supports throughout. And I don't have the numbers with me now, but a large percentage of teachers specialising in special education. English is an additional language. Like all other countries, I think Ireland's profile has changed dramatically in the last number of years. We'll touch on it again later, but the provision of English language in all schools has really increased. And then policy and supports for special education. It's a separate section in the department than the one that Maeve and I work in, but we very much align those supports with often it's the same children who are benefiting from both. So just to move on to the DEYS programme itself. It means delivering equality of opportunity in schools. Unfortunately, the D at the beginning is inclined to make people think of disadvantage. So we're trying to make it and turn it towards the idea of opportunity as opposed to disadvantage. So we've ongoing work, I think, there, but that is the programme that has been there for the last number of years. Started in 2006. We've had a number of reviews through that time. It was extended to new schools in 2022, the most recent extension, and that brings us up to those 1,200 schools who are in the programme at this stage. And as I said, almost over 250,000 of children, therefore benefiting from the supports through the DEYS programme. OECD review of our resource allocation model in 2024, and a budget annually of 180 million. And that doesn't include the special education teachers piece or the special needs assistance pieces or anything like that. That's just, these are purely what we can really say are targeted DEYS supports. Maeve will mention later, we're working towards a new DEYS strategy. We're beetling away at the moment. It has to be published before the end of this year. But a budget announcement very recently, a very welcome increase in our DEYS funding to 228 million going forward. So real commitment and a minister who's really driving the programme and the benefits of it. But in essence, the programme and the supports within the programme haven't really changed a huge amount since those 2006 initial. We had a lot of pilots and initiatives at that time. They were all brought together into the DEYS programme. And while they've developed, and some of them have been scaled, others have been stopped, really it's about funding and it's about people in the schools to really drive the programme. This is probably a little bit of an overlap with what you're trying to do yourselves too on identifying. How do you identify? And within the DEYS programme, it's really about the concentration of disadvantage. So we're supporting through the school as opposed to the individual. While we use the individual's data to inform the level of support that a school gets, it is a school-focused programme. So in order to identify schools, we use our census data and then our HP index, which I think is equivalent to what you use here too. But I would say that, importantly, it's the address of the child that's used. So through our air code system, we can identify on our databases the actual address of the child, and therefore it's the small area data that's used then to identify those schools with these very high concentrations of children coming from areas of disadvantage. We then increase the weighting depending on the number of children that are coming from a traveller Roma background, children residing in direct provision, and unfortunately we've increasing numbers in that area, those coming in through international protection, and children experiencing homelessness. And again, very sadly, those numbers are increasing. So the support is provided in many ways to the school. And then the school does target those resources then at the individual children because, again, like earlier speakers spoke about, it's the school that really knows which children and what support's actually going to work. So while I will outline the various supports that we provide through the DEYS programme, each school will tailor that to match the needs in their own school. This diagram is just to show when we plot the locations onto the maps, we end up with this mix. So you'll find very high-end concentrated disadvantage and then quite wealthy areas next to each other. And we get a lot of queries about why a school beside a school is in DEYS or not DEYS. And it's because of the movement of the pupils. So because, you remember I said, we use the address of the child, not the location of the school. So depending on where the children are coming from into a school, that's how we then judge the resources that would be required in that school, if that makes sense. So to mention some of the supports for the DEYS programme itself, I'll fly through a couple of these because they're kind of self-explanatory, but I want to just mention one or two of them that might be of more interest. So each school gets a grant, an extra grant on top of their capitation, which they use under guidelines from the department, but they're fairly wide and broad guidelines, to be honest. There are reduced class sizes for some of our schools at the higher ends. Additional literacy and numeracy support, so that continuing focus on literacy and numeracy, particularly for the traveller Roma community. Additional leadership support, so extra sort of second-tier leadership posts within some of these schools. They have extra guidance teachers, they have extra NEPS support. NEPS are our education psychologists. Extra support from our inspectorate, although that's not always welcomed, as you might imagine, because sometimes the inspectorate, there's a word in Irish called the kigara, which would put the fear of God into most teachers from past experience and years gone by. But really, it's moving, our inspectors moving like many into that supportive role, continuous development. So there's extra planning support available through the inspectorate for these schools as well. The one I wanted to just mention, or two I wanted to come back to, one is called the HSCL, which is the Homeschool Community Liaison Person. This is a teacher who's seconded out of their teaching post for 5 years, and then they've no teaching for those 5 years. Their whole role is to work with the families. So again, someone earlier mentioned that it's only when you go out into the home or you understand what's happening, the chaos that a child might be coming from, then you know what that child really needs. So those homeschool community liaisons, they are fully qualified teachers, which is a challenge in itself, but it's a hugely respected part of the DEYS programme. The second part I wanted to spend just a little minute on, and I'm conscious, Maeve, I'm starting to eat into your time, is the school completion programme. And that's a team of people who work with the school. They're not teachers. They work they work with the children. So the children, particularly those at risk of early school leaving, breakfast clubs, after-school clubs, homework clubs, weekends, Easter, Christmas, holiday time. That's their core role, is building relationships with the children and making sure they're ready to come back to school, that August intervention, that element. So very, very quickly, is the DEYS programme working? I suppose many of our we've got very positive results in terms of our national testing and our international testing, and I'd agree with Maria. I think the narrative piece that comes behind the PISAs and the TIMS and those that they're the country-specific reports and things like that, they're really, really interesting in terms of digging into some of the challenges. But we do very well in terms of our national and international testing, and our gap has been closing, but obviously challenges still remain. But our most recent OECD report does show a very socioeconomic fairness being a core part of our education system, which is very much something that we like to see. In terms of the gap growing smaller, it has been growing smaller. If I just show you the retention rate or the completion rate here, you can see from the early part of the graph coming down, but you'll notice that we're plateauing, and we're starting to have to ask the hard questions as to why that is. So our gap has decreased from the 16.8% in 2007 to 8.6% in 2021, but we seem to have reached a kind of a level. Now, we don't know if that's post-COVID. Many of the findings post-COVID have been that we've held steady, that we haven't taken another drop in terms of our attainment levels, but our attendance levels, I think, like many other countries, are really struggling. I'm going to hand over to Maeve now, and apologies, Maeve, I've left you slightly short.
Yeah, so I suppose aside from the testing aspect, how we figure out what is happening in our DEYS schools. We have our inspectorate going out to schools on a regular basis, and while we don't create lists of top performing schools or bottom performing schools, the inspectorate will highlight things like key strengths and good practice in schools. And some of these, we're looking, the inspectorate are saying an enjoyment of learning. That in a lot of these DEYS schools where they're performing well, the students enjoy their learning. The teachers and school leaders give challenging learning activities and allow students to apply their learning. So they have high expectations of their students. Just because you're in a DEYS school doesn't mean we don't expect a lot from you. And another piece that's really coming strongly in Irish education at the moment is the agency of the child and young person, so that the children have ownership over their own learning and they have a say in what they're learning. And then that it is reflected in the teacher's practice, that the learning is based on what the children are interested in, what their strengths are, and what their needs are, so that the children and young people see themselves reflected in their learning. The inspectorate, of course, also highlight some areas of development or areas for development. And, they would say that an area for development in a number of schools is consistency of teaching. So that, maybe one teacher in a post-primary school is doing something involving the students in their learning and another teacher isn't. And it's ensuring that we have that consistency in practice. That there are opportunities for active learning, that it's not just teacher talk, that students are active participants, and that its teaching approaches are inclusive. And the other piece is, how do schools themselves use evidence to monitor and review their progress? How do you know what you're doing is working? And there are challenges for us in DEYS. A number of these that still remain is that, yes, the gap between DEYS and non-DEYS school does still exist. There are challenges in terms of well-being. This has an impact on things like attendance. And it manifests, in school avoidance and school refusal. We've got a really rigid system. Schools are either in DEYS or not in DEYS. And what we're looking to now is to move towards something slightly more flexible, more agile. We would have overrepresentation of certain cohorts from minority backgrounds, such as Traveller and Roma, in early school leaving. So we have more children from these backgrounds leaving school early. There's an ongoing impact of learning loss from COVID. We have also, from our 22 census data, we see that Ireland is in general more affluent, but there is a gap between sort of the have and have not. So that deprivation gap is widening. And we have a changing demographic. For the first time since 1851, our population has just gone over 5 million. So for us, that's a huge difference. There are 2.2 million people live in that greater Dublin area. So it's quite a small region on the East Coast. We've had an increase of almost 400,000 people since 2016. And we now have 12.4% of our population is non-Irish resident. So this is a big change in our demographics. And what that leads to, and it sort of reflects with this deprivation gap, is that deprivation is concentrated in geographic areas in Ireland. And from consultations that we've held, we see certain issues are compounded in these areas. So things like children and young people in schools are experiencing acute poverty, they're experiencing hunger, they're experiencing substance abuse, domestic abuse, eviction, homelessness. And these key issues are coming up again and again in these very small areas. Also, similar to Estonia and Sweden, a large majority of these marginalised pupils are in a very small fraction of our schools. So only 11.5% of primary schools serve 80% of traveller pupils. Similarly, 8.7% of schools serve 80% of our Roma pupils, and 14.5% of schools serve 80% of pupils experiencing extreme deprivation. So it's these small concentrated areas, and through the schools themselves highlighting this, as part of our new DEYS strategy, we're in the middle of developing a DEYS Plus scheme. So a scheme to target these very high-end deprivation schools. We're working with a group of principals, homeschool community liaison officers, school completion workers, to do a student-centred design approach. So what do these students really need? And these are kind of the 4 key areas that are coming out of that. So an increase in wellbeing, mental health supports, sort of addressing that trauma, the intergenerational trauma that's in these areas, that these students need to focus on attendance, and be that there's a breakfast club or an after-school club, but a reason to be in school and stay in school. That there's a greater connection to youth services. So what are these students doing outside of school? How are they spending their time? How can we encourage them to come back into school? And then also more people, because it's relationships that are key. So we're also looking then, we need to figure out how we can ensure that this is going to work and stay working. The OECD report recommended that we have a more comprehensive data integration and analysis in education policy, and to promote research on what has an impact, to strengthen our use of data at school level. And it's about, what is working and why. There's so many different parts of DEYS, so many different services, and, how do you pick out the one thing that is the key to success? So we're currently working with the Economic Social Research Institute in Ireland to develop a monitoring and evaluation framework. And we're looking at, what's the data that's available, what evidence can we use? And this framework is going to take the form of developing some baseline indicators. It's going to include data that's held in the department. I mean, in our unit, we don't necessarily know what another unit is collecting, so it's consolidating that information that we have. Then to develop new indicators, which will sort of look outside what we're doing at the moment, which is focused on attainment, attendance, retention. We want to look at that broader spectrum, the creativity, enjoyment, other factors that contribute to success in school. And then I suppose key is our reference sheets. Nobody is going to use this unless they understand what it is and what we're looking for and how it's going to work. So we need consistency in approach and use. And yeah, so basically, what's next for us is we are publishing our new 10-year strategy to set the vision for until 2035 for DEYS. That's going to be published in December. We're looking to address educational disadvantage in all schools and to bring in this new DEYS Plus scheme. So looking at all schools and then targeting where it's needed most. We're looking for a more agile resource allocation model that hopefully in time we don't have this in-out, that it's more flexible and gives support where it's needed. And then I think similar to Estonia and Sweden, we're looking at the whole of government support. And many of our issues in our schools are not caused by the school. It's what's happening in the community, what's happening in the area, and how can we work better as a community to ensure that schools can focus on teaching and learning. So that's it. Garmagiv.
Okay, thank you so much. We have time for, let's say, one question, and we'll keep the rest for the afternoon panel. The question, in my opinion, is very spot on for our context in Czech Republic. So, what negotiations and agreements preceded the establishment of the DEYS program, and how come no government has stopped this program?
Oh. Thanks, Maeve. Not sure I know the answer to that one. So in 2006, there had been a whole range of different governments had brought in different initiatives over time. And I think it was just the stakeholders themselves coming together to say, actually, we need something here now that makes more sense and that we have that multi-annual commitment to the DEYS program. I'm not sure why no one has stopped it, but I'm hoping that it's because it's a really good thing. It's seen as very positive. One of the questions we get asked is there a stigma to being a DEYS school? At the moment, the answer is no, that schools actually want to be in the DEYS program because they know. But I think there's going to be a shift in that over the coming years, and that's part of what we're trying to look at with the next 10-year strategy. Because what you don't want it to become labelled as, and you'll hear Maeve saying there, it's about disadvantage in all schools. It's not just the DEYS programme. So we're trying to move away from this idea that these schools are the DEYS ones. It's disadvantage in all schools, and then higher supports for those that need it most. But I think it is because it has been working. It's very, that piece around the HSCL and the SCP that I mentioned, like in Ireland, I think it's strange in Ireland, education's on the news, daily. Education's just a really important part of Irish life and Irish society. And you'll hear people from outside the school systems talking about these homeschool liaisons or the school completion, and leaving cert gets onto the radio all of the time. So I think because of this focus on education, I think there's just a recognition that there are children who aren't reaching their potential within our system, and therefore the funding. But I would say our funding had plateaued for quite a while as well. Like last year, we got nothing in the budget last year. But this year, we had a change of minister, and she was previously a minister for justice. And I think that really that commitment to seeing what goes wrong when you don't do the early intervention, when you don't intervene in the schools, and dealing with what happens afterwards then, is a real learning. And I think that has helped us too.
I work in a school. I did work briefly in local government, but I'll be honest, I missed seeing children every day too much. So for the last 13 years, I've been at a Gladstone Primary Academy. Now, Gladstone is in Peterborough. When I say that city, I tend to get blank faces. Peterborough, if you travel 1 hour north of London, there you are at Peterborough. It's an inner city school. You can see the data there yourselves. The number of languages we have are 37. If you wonder if Czech is one of those languages, when I was teaching maths on Tuesday and said I was coming to Prague, 4 children stood up and cheered. So yes, we do have children from the Czech Republic in our school. 94% of children don't speak English as their first language, and 47% of pupils qualify for pupil premium funding, which is the way that we identify disadvantaged pupils. So almost half the school and more than double the national rate. So, I pressed the button I was told not to press. Guaranteed, guaranteed. I'll pass this over. It's back, it's back. It's irresistible, isn't it? When you're told not to press something, you have to find out what happens. So, so it's my job, amongst, I'm sure every leader in the room has more than one hat they wear. It's my job amongst several others to raise the achievement of disadvantaged pupils within the school. To do that, we receive pupil premium funding. That's funding per pupil at a rate of £1,515. Now, that means that schools get varying amounts. This grant was introduced in 2011 and is additional to the per pupil funding that all schools get. For Gladstone, that means that I'm responsible for £295,000 each year, which is a lot of money. A school just 8 minutes up the road receives around about £8,000. So it's very variable on the makeup of the pupils. When the funding was first introduced, there was an immediate impact, and up to 2019, the attainment gap halved. Since then, similar to what we were hearing from our colleagues from Ireland, there's been a bit of a plateau. Part of that, I think, was there were a lot of quick wins during that first period of the funding. But what we've moved to now is, rather than a yearly plan looking at immediate issues, is looking at plans that look at bigger issues over a longer time period. So the plan that I'm going to talk about today is a 3-year plan. We're going to talk about outcomes after year 1, just from one aspect of the plan. I'm sure you can appreciate with that amount of money, there were several areas that I actually worked on. So when I was given responsibility for this very big budget, I looked to really improve my own knowledge of best practice with disadvantaged pupils. So I worked with an organisation called the Education Endowment Foundation. Through that work, I was really privileged to be asked to join a reference group of 6 schools, where we were able to share best practice, find out what worked in our schools, find out if anybody had similar issues, work together on plans. It was a really useful time. They also provide a free website, yes, free. Not many things free in this world, are there? But absolutely free, where you can go on and look at different strategies and have them evaluated. It looks like this. Both sides are important because they tell you if it's very costly, but they also tell you the potential impact of that strategy. We love the ones that have very high impact and very low cost. Unfortunately, there's not that many of those, but I will share a couple of those that we found effective later. So those were the Gladstone attendance figures, and this is the aspect of the plan that I'm going to focus on as we go forward. The national average in the UK is 94.5%. You can see Gladstone at the end of 23-24 was considerably below that point. And our disadvantaged pupils were even lower than that. Persistent absence that's when I say persistent absent, I'll refer to that several times. In the UK, we draw the line at 90%. Any child below 90% attendance is described as persistently absent. It's not a line that's necessarily arbitrary, but The government chose to put it there. Of course, I work in a school, so I might be more naughty than Martin when talking about the government, but there is evidence. Leeds University conducted some research that showed that every 5% drop in attendance does have a relative impact on academic achievement. So although it's not a cliff edge or anything like that, if children are consistently below 90%, it is going to impact their outcomes over a period of time. So because we had this issue, I needed to plan a strategy to really unpick what the issues were. One of the key things is, as I said, looking at a 3-year plan. So what I didn't say is, right, in 1 year, we're going to go from 90% to 100% attendance. I love a challenge, but I like to achieve challenging targets. So what we looked at was that the outcome would be, at the end of year 1 of the plan, 93% attendance and 91% for our disadvantaged pupils, which would be a rise of 2% in year 1. And then looking for a similar rise in year 2, so that our actual overall attendance would be slightly above the national average. When developing the plan, we looked at certain core ingredients. By that I mean, what were we going to do consistently as a school? And one of the really important parts of that is clarifying the roles for everybody. So when I shared the plan, every person involved knew what their role was. Every teacher knew what their role was. Every leader knew what their role was. Parents knew what their roles were. And children knew what their roles were. I've popped an example up there. I'm not daft. I chose one where it's all green. But I'll use the pointer without trying to turn it off. So the evaluation stage, I will talk about that a bit more later. But that was really key, evaluating each stage that we worked through the plan for seeing if it actually worked. You can look at research, you can make a plan, but of course if it isn't working, you've got to change it. And I'll pull out one aspect that really wasn't working, that we had to change. So when we came to implement the strategy, research shows that one of the key aspects in attendance is a sense of belonging. Children say, I don't feel like I belong in the school, I have no connection to the school, and that's what we needed to change. And actually, as we unpicked that further, we found that with some members of our community, that went even further than that, that it was the families that didn't feel connected to the school. So everything that we did was around increasing that sense of belonging with the school. Part of that was our meet and greet strategy. So school leaders are on the school gate every morning and at the end of the day as well. So we greet every single child as they come into school. We also have a welfare officer, so that's the member of staff who supports pupils with emotional issues, and she's always present as well. So any child arriving at school in a distressed state can immediately be picked up, have their issues spoken about, and if further support is needed, it can be accessed at the start of the school day, so that child can then go on to have a successful day. Teachers are at their doors. Every child coming in to their classroom receives a handshake from their teacher. We had to pause that during COVID, but receives a handshake from their teacher and is greeted personally. At Gladstone, we have a high rate of mobility. So last year it was 27%. That's a lot of children to change in a school over the course of a year. What we found was around 80% of the children coming into the school either spoke no English or the most challenging circumstance spoke no English and had no previous experience of school. So to help build that sense of belonging, we run an induction group, which is an 8-week program where children work in a small group. They learn key phrases of English, they learn school routines, they can ask any questions they don't understand about how the day works, and they are gradually inducted into their main class. So rather being dropped straight away into a class where they can't understand what's being said, don't know where they're going next, they're fully prepared to be a part of that class. Again, building that sense of belonging. Class prizes. I can tell a child they need to improve their attendance. It's much more effective when the whole class, all their friends, are telling them, we want you to improve your attendance because we want to win the class prize. I'll show you a couple of the class prizes in a few moments. But that family involvement, how did we get families more engaged with the school? Well, we decided to go with a bit of a novel approach. You may have heard of Glastonbury, the famous music festival. So we started Gladstoneberry. So it's quite the show. If you ever are in Peterborough in July, we have live music, and one of the acts is made up of teachers. They think they're very good. We have bouncy castles that the children can ride. We have face painting. We have food stalls. We have local dance groups, which is wonderful. So seeing dances from different communities is absolutely wonderful, celebrating that cultural heritage that all our children have. Absolutely wonderful. And we've seen parents come into Glastonbury that we'd never seen before. So a really great way of building that sense of belonging with the school. And really being visible to parents. I don't want to be the person they only see when attendance is low. I don't want to be that person who's just there to be negative with them. So we have a bit of a busy road by the school, which we close each morning. And I go out on one of the closures and make sure that any child whose attendance is improving, I'm saying well done to the parent as well. So the child gets a bit of a, but the parent gets a, oh, they're saying something positive to me. We've also been able to invest in a data system that parents can actually access and see daily what their child's attendance is. And that's really important as well, that they have that knowledge. I'm only going to talk briefly about this. The government thinks the best strategy is fines. I'll give you all the data you need on that. In the last 6 years, fines, the number of fines issued has doubled. And guess what's happened to the amount of absence? It's doubled as well. So really, parents, they see it as part of the cost of a cheaper holiday. It's not an effective strategy. It's one we have to follow because it's a requirement of schools in the UK. But our plan wasn't about increasing the number of fines. It was about increasing that sense of belonging. The government has brought in a 3-strike system, but it's a 3-year, so I've got no data on whether that's going to impact yet. It only came in last year, but in the 3rd strike, it's a very big fine, but I have no data on that, and we shall see if the government policy stays the same that long. So, sharing data, I've already talked about how we started sharing data with parents. We take every opportunity to share the data. Here's some of our fantastic pupils having received an achievement award, but what's behind them there? That's the attendance data for their year group and their class. And we make sure those graphs are up around the school. So we've gone from a culture of children not really showing an interest in their data to walking down and going, how's my class doing? Are we winning? And keeping those updated every week so that children see, and you know, as as a person who's very interested in mathematics, seeing children read bar graphs gives me a little bit of a kick as well. So it's a win-win. But making sure staff are fully informed. So I send a weekly email out to staff, giving the latest league tables of attendance, and our teachers can be very competitive, I found. So, I don't need to remind them to talk about attendance. If I tell them that they're only 0.4% behind the other class in their year group, you can hear every morning that teacher saying, come on, we're going to be in first place next week. With the students as well, one thing that we've done is my attendance team, we've split the school up into 5 classes each. That's what we found is manageable in the mornings. And we go round those classrooms, and any child who is persistently absent, we speak directly to that child and we tell them how many days it is until they're no longer scary on the list. Now, we don't use that to label children. It's not, oh, you're terrible, you're on the list. It's, this is the person who can help your class win. This is the child who, if their attendance goes up, you're going to win the attendance prize. So rather than getting any kind of laughing at or any put downs, what they get is their class cheering them when they turn up, because they're getting very excited that they've got a chance of winning the prize. That's really important that we do that every morning, because we get to know those children. Yes, I could go around 20 classes, but I wouldn't know those children on such a personal level. Engaging in the community as well. I believe you have Petter coming tomorrow, who's one of the leaders of the Compass charity. What was really useful is working with community leaders to help share the message about attendance. I say things in a certain way. What Petter and Compass were able to do was produce a YouTube video in a range of languages that, I'll be honest, is in a style that I would never have produced, because I don't speak the same language as our community. So involving people that do is really important. And those videos are really useful for our parents starting to understand the importance of school attendance. With parent meetings, what we started to do was make sure teachers had the exact number of days missed and a clear list of which parents they needed to spend that time on. Not just talking about where they are in maths, where they are in English, but talking about what could be achieved if that attendance was increased. Part of our strategy for parents understanding the importance of a missed day is we hold parent cafes. We find food is a great motivator for attendance. So we're now on a nice lunch, and then the parents join their children in class for the afternoon, and they can see just how much learning takes place. That really drives home, oh, it's just a day. They can actually see just how much learning takes place. And that's been a really important driver. We don't deliver the invites. We get the children to invite their parents, because they can be very persuasive. I'll just take a moment to speak to you about Naldino. Naldino was one of the children in one of the 5 classes that I monitor each day. And at the end of the autumn term, his attendance was 79.6%. I sat down with Naldino and his dad, and we looked through his books, looked for a child who had 100% attendance, and went through all the learning that he'd missed. We all agreed at that point that if it didn't change, he had his age 11 tests at the end of the year. And what the statistics show is if you pass those, you've got a 90% chance of getting good grades by the time you leave school. If you don't pass those, it drops to 12%. So for him to be able to pass those, something had to change. I'll be honest with you, I thought it was an impossible job. To achieve it, he had to attend every single day for the rest of the year. Now, to motivate him, because I'd got to know Naldino, Some children, this wouldn't have been motivating, but for him, this was the right phrase to say. I told him, that will be a record for Gladstone that I don't think will ever be broken. And he sat up at that, and it was just the most wonderful time. Every day he came in, and because I was there each morning, I was saying, the record's still on. His class were getting excited. They were getting more and more. We got to the summer term. It was still on. Then we started talking about only 20 more days, only 10. When we got to 10 days, there was a morning when he was 5 minutes late, and the whole class went, and then he walked in and they went, hey! So it was wonderful. And on that last day, in he walked, and he didn't need me to say anything. He had this ear-to-ear smile on his face, and he strode in, and I had a big round golden sticker, and I slapped it on his chest, and I said, that will never be broken. And it was just a wonderful moment. And in case you're wondering, he did pass all of his Year 6, his Age 11 tests, so he got that payoff as well. Yeah, I miss Naldino. So just a couple of our quick, easy strategies that we did. We did the 100 Club. So that was for children who achieved 100%. We didn't just look at the children who were persistently absent. To improve attendance, we looked at those who attended well but could attend even better. So the 100 Club, we went from, over the first 7 weeks of school, we got an uptake immediately, and over the whole year, the change was 3 times the amount of children who were there every single day. In case you're wondering what the 100 Club was, basically, if you stayed at 100% for the school term, there was then a prize at the end of that. So one of the terms at the end of the prize, we had a DJ come in with a disco set up in the school hall. The important thing was the children felt really special. So they came to their desks, and there was a mysterious envelope. And when they opened the envelope, there was a golden ticket with their name on, with the invitation to the disco. They were allowed to wear their party clothes, and down they came. Not only was it important for them to really enjoy that day, it was really important for the other children to see them going off and saying, hang on, next term I want some of that. So the reason why we did it termly was so you could get that buy-in, because otherwise, if you just run it for a whole year, when you miss one day, that's it, you've given up. So the 100 Club, the other really simple strategy that we did were Friday Freddos. So Friday Freddos were a really great way of making children motivated to attend school. I think I made some dentists angry in the area, but never mind. So if a class achieved 100% attendance for the week, they all got one of these chocolate bars. But we had a big clear container. And if there was a week when nobody won, another 30 were pulled in. Now, I don't know if you know English chocolates, but we didn't call it a rollover, we called it a rollo-over. That's an English chocolate. But you can imagine the excitement as this field. And again, it wasn't down to what we didn't need to motivate the children. They were saying, you need to be here tomorrow. You need to be here tomorrow. And they were all motivating each other because they wanted those Friday Freddos. But yeah, we wouldn't win a Healthy School Award, maybe. So monitoring the strategy, really key. So each day we had something called a scrum. A scrum is simply a meeting that we hold for 5 minutes where we agree actions that will happen that day. So a really sharp, focused meeting. That was only possible because we knew our classes really well. So we didn't need a big discussion. We came together, and in those 5 minutes, we said, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing. Equally, I then needed to meet each week with a link meeting. So that's when I met with members of the attendance team and checked those Scrum actions and the impact of those, but also as a support. So if they said, I'm meeting this parent this week and they're a bit tricky, I would go and do that meeting for them or with them. So a really great way to two-way talk. But also, because they'd got to know their families, they didn't need me to say, you should do this, we could have a discussion. And if I suggested something and they said, no, this would be better, it was important that I listened to that because they knew those families better. And half-termly reviews, as you saw from my coloured pen. An example of something we changed, so meeting with parents. I don't know if you find that easy here. We didn't have a great success rate. And I'd be sitting there in the attendance office and the clock would go round and no one would turn up. So it was wasting every adult's time who was there. So we said, we've got to change something, or this part of the strategy just isn't working. So what we did was, instead of sending out an appointment to parents, we met parents when they dropped their children off and picked them up and took them for their meeting. We went from a success rate of about one in 5 meetings taking place to 9 out of every 10 meetings we were able to hold. So that was an important change, to actually look at what's happening in the plan. That's not working. Let's change it. How can we change it? Not throw away the parent meetings. What can we change to make them successful? And leadership pipeline. So that's something that we use in Gladstone, that we support and challenge down, but also we have that support and challenge from above us as well. So each week I would have a meeting. The principal didn't need to get involved in the day-to-day running of attendance. He wanted to know where we were against the plan, anything he could do to help me. And if he felt that we weren't on track, then he would challenge me about that as well. But that was really useful. And sometimes it was little things, like he kept calling meetings at 9 o'clock when I needed to do my Scrum. So I said, can you just do them at 9:05? And he went, oh yeah, okay. So simple solution. So did it work? Well, these are the outcomes for attendance. We had a 1/3 reduction in the number of children who were persistently absent. Of the 92 children who were still persistently absent, 76 of those actually improved from the previous year. And I took those as wins as well. A child who goes from 60% to 80%, yes, hasn't crossed that line, but they've been in a lot more lessons than they were the previous year. Disadvantaged attendance rose to 91.3. I had to round it down, so I call it 91. Yeah, the mathematician in me. But yeah, we certainly achieved the target for year 1. Now, what's the point of all that if it doesn't impact on academic outcomes? Well, our academic outcomes last year. So the first, we have a lot of tests and measures in the UK. Children at the age of 5 are assessed against different areas of development. So our disadvantaged pupils were actually above the national level at the end of their first year in school. We also have in year 1, which is age 6, a phonics check. So phonics is the early teaching of sounds and putting those sounds together to be able to read words. And we actually closed the gap so that disadvantaged pupils were level with non-disadvantaged pupils. Our non-disadvantaged pupils were disadvantaged pupils were above non-disadvantaged in reading and writing. The only gap we had last year was in mathematics. So those extra days really paid off. All that extra learning the children could do. 2%. It's not a big number, but it made a big difference to our outcomes. So what? What are we going to do this year? Well, we looked back at September 24 and we noticed that we had a lot of children that don't return on time. So we mirror quite closely the national attendance, but we start so far below it. So we've used some of our funding this year to put in 3 additional days so our attendance team can work the week before school starts and contact all of those families and make sure they're ready for day 1 of school. It shows that any child who misses a day in that first week has a more than 50% chance of being persistently absent, being below 90% over the whole year. That drops to 14% if they're there for the whole first week. So that's a simple change that we've put in place. And our week 1, that was 92.8, was 94.6 this year. So we'll certainly be keeping that in place going forward. We will have to adjust that, address that gap in mathematics. I've put there that booster support, it's going to be me. So, because I haven't got enough to do. But no, I love teaching maths, so that's all good. So I'll be teaching booster lessons and hopefully be able to close those gaps. I'm sure we'll have good academic outcomes in Year 6 next year. Just to close, in case anyone doubts that disadvantaged pupils can achieve just as well as their peers, a bit of my history. I grew up with just my mum and my 2 sisters. I didn't really see my mum in the evenings. She had to work a job, the only job that she could get. So I had no one to help me with my homework. My eldest sister used to try and cook us tea, and yes, she did nearly burn the house down one night. And all through school, I had free school meals because otherwise I'd have been hungry. But you know, it's a testament. I can think back now to Mr. Patton, who was the teacher who ignored my terrible handwriting and saw that what I was writing was actually quite good. Mr. Teague, he spent 5 minutes at the end of a lesson making sure that I understood what he'd talked about if he'd seen me looking a bit confused. And Miss Self, who lent me her textbooks because I couldn't go out and buy the English books. I hope she was proud when my major at university was English literature, the subject that she taught. So as a former disadvantaged pupil standing before you today, you can make a difference. Thank you.